Good evening, you're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. As world leaders and hundreds and thousands of mourners are expected in Rome, the clock counts down to a final farewell for Pope Francis. More on that in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. A senior Russian general is killed in a car explosion near Moscow. Democracy campaigners take to the streets in Slovakia. And 1,000 years on since the coronation of Poland's first king. More than 100,000 worshippers have paid their respects to Pope Francis in Rome. And as we go to air tonight, the late pontiff's coffin is just moments away from being sealed for the final time. Our correspondent Alex Cardier is in the Italian capital and joins me now. Good evening, Alex. Take us to the Vatican. How will the next 24 hours play out?
Well, good evening, Aaron. Pope Francis's coffin will be sealed in a matter of minutes, in a matter perhaps of seconds for the final time. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the Camerlengo, the Chamberlain of the Catholic Church, now the highest authority until we have a new pope, will oversee that rite of sealing the rather basic wood and zinc coffin. That was the request of Pope Francis, a low-key moment for what was seen by so many here we've spoken to in the last few days as a humble pope. Now, the access to St. Peter's Basilica behind me has been shut. As you said, 100,000 people or more have come to say a final goodbye. Then on Saturday, tomorrow, you will have the funeral at 10 o'clock. That will happen on St. Peter's Square behind me. We expect 250,000 people will be on this square to pay their respects, to attend that funeral. Of course, we will have extensive live coverage on TVP World of Pope Francis's funeral from Saturday 10 a.m. at Central Eastern Time. But before, today was all about mourning, about reflecting. So many people came. Many came here to pray. Many came here to mourn. But everybody, Aaron, came here to say a final goodbye to Pope Francis.
Our correspondent in Rome, Alex Cardier, thank you. US President Donald Trump insists Crimea will stay with Russia. That's according to an interview for Time magazine, amid reports that America's latest peace proposal includes Ukraine recognising the land illegally annexed by Russia in 2014. It comes as Trump envoy Steve Witkoff meets with Vladimir Putin again in Moscow. Kazimierz Szwysiak reports.
Leaving for Italy for the funeral of Pope Francis on Friday, US President Donald Trump was cautiously optimistic about reaching a peace deal on Ukraine.
Well, I think Russia and Ukraine, I think they're coming along, we hope. Very fragile.
The latest reports on the potential agreement focused on the alleged US proposal for Ukraine to recognize Crimea as Russian. In an interview for Time magazine, President Trump has made it clear he cares not about the legality of such recognition.
Crimea will stay with Russia. Zelensky understands that, and everybody understands that it's been with them for a long time.
The strategic peninsula was illegally annexed by Russia in 2014. Its occupation is considered by many as the de facto start of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And while Ukraine may not like it,
Ukraine does not and will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. This is a matter of principle, enshrined in our constitution.
there isn't really much it can do about it, at least for now.
We understand that de facto situation might be different from the de jure situation, but nevertheless, Crimea is Ukrainian, Donbass is Ukrainian, and no government in Ukraine will ever agree on any territorial concessions which will be on the paper.
So, is the peace deal any closer? In Moscow, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has once again met with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. But while Witkoff was all smiles, it doesn't reflect Donald Trump's recent mood, as the US leader is growing frustrated with the Russians continuing their offensive in Ukraine and refusing to agree to a ceasefire.
Not happy with the Russian strikes on Kiev. Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov responded on Friday with a declaration.
The statement by the president mentions a deal, and we are ready to reach a deal, but there are still some specific points, elements of this deal which need to be fine-tuned.
And while this may seem like a groundbreaking statement, it's actually the same messaging Russia has used for more than a month since the US administration first proposed an immediate ceasefire. This fine-tuning of details has continued for weeks, even though Ukraine agreed to the temporary truce there and then, and peace is still not here. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
And standing by in Kyiv is our correspondent, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. What has been the reaction to today's developments?
Well, we've just had a statement as we've come on air from President Zelensky, in which he says diplomacy must work, and we are doing everything to ensure that diplomacy becomes truly meaningful and finally works. So certainly not dismissive of US attempts here. But as Witkoff is meeting Putin for the fourth time in 3 months, we have very little to show for it. And in fact, the documents presented to Reuters, published today, show how far the sides are. We know from US reporting that the Americans came to Europe last week and they presented their proposals based on these discussions between Witkoff and Putin on how to end the conflict. Those proposals included US recognition of Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, a territory they conquered by force and claim as their own, upending decades of post-war liberal consensus between nations. That, as well as lifting all sanctions on Russia enacted since 2014, since the first Russian invasion of Ukraine. These proposals were seen as completely unacceptable to the Ukrainians. We've heard President Zelensky since say that Crimea is Ukraine will never recognize Russia's control over Crimea, its legitimacy over Crimea. That's not the way the Ukrainians see it at all. President Zelensky has also reiterated that today. He also reiterated, while stating that he believes that Kyiv doesn't have the military capabilities at the moment to take Crimea by force. But that said, he said there were other means, other measures, sanctions, etc., that could be imposed to reach an agreement in which Ukraine gets control of its sovereign territory back. Now, these are the way the Ukrainians view it. The Americans have put their side, and we know they see it very, very differently. As it stands, though, these two sides are very, very far apart. The Ukrainians have sent back counter proposals. These documents were presented to Reuters. They showed that they wanted territorial discussions to happen after a ceasefire is in place. They want to move first for a full unconditional ceasefire with Russia, and they will discuss territorial concessions, territorial matters based on the lines of control once that ceasefire has been declared. The other important parts of it is the return of all kidnapped children kidnapped by Russia, and really crucially, the crucial element, security guarantees from the United States to ensure that Russia doesn't invade again in the future. These things are things that Washington has categorically rejected, not all of them, but certainly the security guarantee proposal in the past now. So whether or not these sides are going to find any way of bridging that gap remains to be seen. Right now, the talks are ongoing. On the ground, the strikes are still taking place, and we are no further to a ceasefire.
Thank you, Oz Chatterjee, our correspondent in Kyiv. On the same day that Steve Witkoff arrived in Moscow, a senior Russian military official was killed just outside the country's capital. Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik died after a bomb exploded in his car. The Kremlin has blamed Ukraine, but no suspects have been formally named. Natalia Komarov has more.
On Friday morning, a car explosion rocked an exclusive neighborhood in the town of Balashikha near Moscow.
There was a loud bang. I went to the kitchen to look out of the window. The car was already on fire.
Russia's investigative committee has confirmed that the explosion had killed Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik, one of the top decision makers in the Russian armed forces. His directorate is responsible for strategic military planning and the coordination of Russia's military operations. Yaroslav Moskalik also took part in multiple top-level negotiations on behalf of Russia, including the famous Minsk agreements, which were meant to ensure a ceasefire after the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014.
According to available information, the detonation of the Volkswagen Golf occurred as a result of the activation of a homemade explosive device filled with striking elements.
So far, Russian investigators have not named any suspects. We asked Alexandra Shapalina, a Warsaw-based journalist and former producer in the late Alexander Navalny's team, whether Ukraine has anything to gain from the death of the general.
I think it's more or less just political gesture to put some, I would say, pressure on political regime to make people be scared of their own lives, to think twice before they agree to work for Putin's regime in terms of participation in the war.
Targeted assassinations against high-ranking Russian officials have become more frequent since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in 2022. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has revealed the country's new Piast doctrine, which he says will help the country catch up to the world's largest economies. Tusk made the announcement during a celebratory session of the Polish Parliament in Gniezno, where Poland's first king, Bolesław the Brave, from the Piast dynasty, was crowned. Ovidio Sznieczeja was there.
This place is the cradle of the Polish state. Gniezno is the first historic capital of Poland, and it's here at the Royal Gniezno Cathedral that the first 5 Polish kings were crowned. The coronation of the first of whom, Bolesław the Brave, took place in 1025. Now, 1,000 years on, during the millennial celebrations of the coronation, Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, announced Poland's new doctrine that is to guide the Polish state. It's based on 3 pillars. 1, the strongest army in this part of the world. 2, the strongest economy in the region. And 3, strong political position in Europe.
Looking at the pace at which we are developing, I can say without any complexes that in a few years we will really catch up with the largest economies, such as the German economy or the Japanese economy, because we are one step away from that. We just have to have as much faith in ourselves as King Bolesław the Brave had.
And this is the venue where the celebratory joint session of the Polish lower and upper house of parliament has taken place. Polish highest-ranking officials, including the president and prime minister, have joined this celebration of Polish history and statehood.
I stand here as the head of the Polish state to bow down to Bolesław the Brave and Mieszko II Lambert on behalf of my countrymen. These monarchs in the year of our Lord 1025 were the first to assume the crown as independent rulers of the Kingdom of Poland. Sovereigns of the state co-created European Christianitas, that is, a community whose foundations and bond were the Decalogue and values that have been shaping our tradition, culture and identity for 1,000 years.
Yes, it's a very important part of our history, and that was shown in the speeches by the President of Poland, the Speaker of Parliament, the Speaker of the Senate and the Prime Minister, who said we should be more like the ruler crowned 1,000 years ago, that is brave, strong, courageous and clever, because we are an intrinsic part of the Western world.
The 1,000th anniversary of the coronation of the first Polish king, Bolesław the Brave, is celebrated throughout 2025. These celebrations include concerts, picnics and exhibitions. All of these are meant to show that Poland, despite its difficult history, despite the partitions and the occupation, has survived as a state, and the nation continues to be proud of its history. From Gniezno for TVP World, Ovidio Sznieczeja.
Protesters have gathered in cities across Slovakia, including the capital Bratislava, to oppose new legislation they claim could restrict free expression. They say it will also undermine the work of NGOs. Paweł Czaskowski reports.
No to the Russian law and Slovakia is Europe. These were the slogans that could be heard across Slovakia over the last 2 days. Demonstrations were staged in several cities across the country, with protesters opposing the new Russia-style legislation that, in their opinion, aims to crack down on non-governmental organizations.
The government is showing its incompetence in everything it does, aligning itself with the Russian aggressor. It is trying to find ways to suppress freedom in Slovakia, which will lead to the overall decline of the country.
The legislation was passed by the parliament last week. Under the new law, NGOs will be obliged to publish reports with detailed information about their leaders and donors contributing more than €5,000 a year. And, according to some NGO representatives, such scrutiny serves to intimidate the non-profits in retaliation for their criticism of the rule of Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico.
We call it Russian law because it's inspired by the Russian law that limits NGOs in Russia, and it is also approved in the atmosphere when the politicians regularly attack the NGOs, mostly the NGOs working in anti-corruption and rule of law.
On Friday, the protesters appealed to the country's president, Petr Pellegrini, to block the bill. Pellegrini is Fico's political ally, but the two haven't been seeing eye to eye on matters recently. And the deadline to veto the new law passes on May the 2nd. But if the legislation is eventually signed into law, the protests can only intensify. Regular demonstrations started 4 months ago after Fico's controversial meeting with Vladimir Putin last December, and have grown steadily ever since, reaching a scale unseen in Slovakia since the 1989 Velvet Revolution. But so far, they have failed to change the country's political trajectory, with Prime Minister Fico planning to attend the Victory Day parade in Moscow as the only leader of an European Union country. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
At a time of tariff turmoil and economic uncertainty, Poland wants to keep its partners close. And while the country is increasingly focusing on the domestic market, there's also a push to maintain the transatlantic relationship. In fact, Polish Finance Minister Andrzej Domański is in Washington this week to meet with counterparts from around the world, as well as sit down with officials in the Trump White House. Earlier, I spoke exclusively with Minister Domański, and this is what he told me. Poland's Minister of Finance, Andrzej Domański, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You're in the American capital for the spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund. I understand you've met with Trump officials, the likes of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. What are you looking for in Washington? What's the purpose of being on the ground?
Well, first of all, it's a great chance to meet with world economic leaders to discuss the most challenging issues like rising trade tensions, like GDP growth forecasts that are currently being cut by International Monetary Fund. It's also a great opportunity to meet with the ministers of finance from all over the world. Actually, I met a minister of finance from Korea, Qatar, also Egypt, Canada. So people you rarely can meet in Europe, and it's a great opportunity because I do believe that in the time of rising geopolitical tension, with more and more, let me say it, tension also in the terms of trade, it's very important for us, for Poland, to strengthen our economic relations with other countries. And it is a great opportunity here in Washington.
Let's talk about those trade tensions. The IMF has dropped Poland's GDP growth forecast from 3.5 to 3.2% in 2025. Is the drop because of Donald Trump's tariffs? And do you expect that number to fall further?
Well, IMF has pointed that rising uncertainty is one of the reasons that the global forecasts are being cut. And of course, as Polish economy is well integrated in the global value chains, the rising tension could have impact on Polish economy. Our own forecasts are slightly more optimistic. We forecast 3.9% GDP growth this year. Having said that, we also see some downside risk to this forecast, mainly because of rising trade tension. So we do hope that a good trade deals will be reached between US and other countries, between US and European Union. It's fully up to European Commission to negotiate with our US friends. Having said that, of course, during meetings like I had here in Washington with Kevin Hassett or Scott Bessent, Secretary of Treasury, it's also my duty to present our Polish perspective.
Important discussions for sure. Let's look at the domestic picture. The public finance books show a 2024 6.6% GDP deficit. That's the second highest in the EU. Only Romania has a higher deficit. Obviously, defence is a big part of the picture, but social spending too. How are you going to finally bring that down? And do you expect to meet the EU's target of 3% by 2028?
Well, we are, of course, well aware of the deficit, which is high. Let's put it. Let's be open about that. And as you said, a huge part of that is because of our growing defense spending. We spent close to 5% on defense this year, and in the previous year it was 4%. So it was the highest number among all NATO members. And we need to continue such a policy because we do not underestimate the threat from Russia. It's also worth to notice that there was a flood in Poland in 2024, which was also, we as a government, we needed to secure additional funding because of this flood. So it's very important for us to maintain a high GDP growth. Thanks to it, we will manage to lower our deficit. And this year, as you know, as I said a moment ago, we forecast a GDP of close to 4%, and we are working hard to maintain a high pace of GDP growth in the following years as well. This is why the government is investing a lot in energy transition. This is why a huge and very important deregulation effort is being made right now to make business environment in Poland even more friendly. So step by step, we'll be cutting our deficit thanks to growing economy. And as a government, we do whatever it takes to maintain a high GDP growth in the following years as well.
So given some of these revised forecasts and those steps that you point out, could Poland look to raise taxes or cut social spending at some point in the medium term to bring that deficit down?
We are not planning rising taxes, neither cutting social spendings.
On the European Union's borrowing limits, will Poland request an exemption to keep up the long-term large defence spending? And if so, when will you make a decision on this?
Well, let me start by saying that we are witnessing, I would call it, a European awakening in terms of defense, in terms of security. Europe finally realizes that we must take more responsibility for our own security. And this is why countries like Poland spend 4.7% of its GDP. And this is why we are urging our European partners to spend more. And this is also why we welcome the European Commission proposal for rearm package. Important part of that is up to 150 billion of loans that could be used to finance military spendings.
These exemptions, are they the basically the exemptions from the borrowing rules, are they the only way the EU will be able to properly defend itself? Are you worried other countries won't be willing to take on further debt, especially those further away from Russia? And as I mentioned earlier, will you make a decision about whether or not Poland takes part in the next week?
First of all, Poland is seriously considering applying for national escape clause, and we will take this decision in coming days. Then, we are of course thinking about other tools that could help increase spending on defense in Europe. It's worth to notice that in the rearm package, there are other tools as well. For example, more flexibility in using EU funds or national escape clause for countries that like to spend more but have limited fiscal space. Anyway, we will be working with our partners in order to create additional tools if tools presented by European Commission won't be big enough.
Lastly, I want to ask you about this idea of repolonization that Prime Minister Donald Tusk has talked about and what that means for Poland's role in Europe. He says Poland will, quote, not be a naive partner in this increasingly ruthless contest of selfishness on the world market. Do you agree with that? And are you confident this approach won't contravene the EU's single market rules?
Well, of course, we will not break European single market rules. What we are urging is greater participation of Polish companies in value chains. We are investing a lot in energy transition, in infrastructure, and we would like to see more and more Polish companies participating in this process, as we would like to accelerate Polish economy even further. And as I said a moment ago, it's crucial for us to maintain this high GDP growth. And as Prime Minister said a couple of days ago, repolonization of these value chains could be a very important step towards that.
As Poland moves towards a closer focus on the domestic market, could the EU's single market rules, in fact, hold the country back? Do these rules need a review in this new age of high defence spending, economic uncertainty?
No, Poland is and always will be in favour of a single market. Actually, we benefited a lot by the accession to the European Union, not only because of the funds that we received, but mainly because our companies get access to European markets. So we will always defend single European market, and actually we'll be even fighting for further improvement of that. As a recent report of IMF pointed out, that internal barriers for industrial goods within the European Union equalize at tariffs of above 40%. So there's a lot of room for further work, and must be good both for Poland and the European Union.
Poland's Minister of Finance, Andrzej Domański, thank you again for your time from Washington.
Thank you for having me.